Morning. Welcome to our webinar. We'll be starting in about 5 minutes. Morning, everyone. We'll be starting in about 3 minutes. Thanks for joining. Morning, everyone. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Morning, everyone. We'll be starting in about 1 minute. Thanks for joining. Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we will get underway we know we'll have a few more people joining, and because of the time frame Cal OSHA gave us, many will be looking at the recording of this webinar over the next several days. So most of um, you know the basics here. Please put your questions in the chat. We're going to answer them as we go because we're going to cover a fair amount of ground on Cal OSHA's lead regulations today. If you have any issues technically, so forth, Deneen Wolf, who you see on screen, is ready to help. She sent you an email this morning with her phone number and email address. So away we go. We're going to talk about Cal OSHA lead regulations taking effect January 1. Sadly, they didn't give us much time to deal with them. But we want to put the information out there so you can make informed choices about them. Most of you know me, Bruce Wick, a Director of Risk Management for housing contractors, my contact info. As we go forward, this regulation has had dramatic changes made to it that we believe are a big overreach. But, we're going to learn how Cal OSHA over time, how Cal OSHA is actually going to enforce it or not, to what level, and we're going to learn how to implement it. So please call me, email me with questions, give me, your tips on things that helped you walk through the implementation of this, etc. There's a lot to go through. So here we go. We're going to look at the regulatory changes, obviously, and we're going to look right now. We're going to split this kind of into two things. One is, what are the main points? What is Cal OSHA, if they're going to start enforcing this in any effective way, January 1, what are they looking for? And what would be easy citations for them? We're going to talk about you making informed choices about how to respond to this. And then the regulation in its depth, if it does potentially apply as overly broad as they've made the regulation, how do we walk through doing that? It could be incredibly, tremendously expensive to follow it to the T. And obviously we want to say, let's be in full compliance with Cal OSHA regs, but man, this one is such a big reg, and you'll see overdone that people are going to make choices about that, and we understand that. We're going to try and give you the information to help deal with that. So there are web links here in the packet that was sent to you. The the ones we're going to look at today, that first web link is just for the lead page for Cal OSHA that shows you all the rest of these pieces of information. We're going to look at the executive summary, that second one, a bit. There's a fact sheet for employees that is probably what you will use to train employees on this regulation. It's fairly well done, I think. There's another lead and construction fact sheet for employers that gives you a little more information. You might want your safety director will probably want to review that in some in depth. And then they gave us a model program if we were going to comply with this. And we're going to talk about whether we want to actually step into having an actual program or not. But I appreciate they took the time to set up something. It's a fillable template. So if we have to go into the depths of this regulation, they've made it a little bit easier for us. And then that last one is a 42-page guide that is longer than the regulation itself, that has information maybe your safety director will want to review at some point in time. All right. So we're going to give a little background just so you know the impetus for Cal OSHA making such significant changes, because that'll probably be part of your decision making, how far you want to go with full compliance with this thing. This actually comes from the California Department of Public Health. They pushed it on Cal OSHA. Unfortunately, to keep Cal OSHA personnel, the Deputy Chief of Research and Standards, who's one of three deputy chiefs in Cal OSHA and therefore very influential. And one of his key staffers totally agreed with the Department of Public Health and ramrodded this through Cal OSHA. There have been concerns expressed that, you know, while society, we've been doing a lot on lead. We've taken lead out of paint 40 years ago, lead out of gasoline, lead out of fixtures. I mean, so many things are incredibly lower in lead in environments, you know, other than basically water, are still some concerns. But suddenly somebody said after 40 years, well, maybe there can be health impacts at lower exposure levels than we previously thought. And the problem is the way CDPH and those Cal OSHA personnel ramrodded this thing in one document. They went from there are indications there may be health impacts at lower level of exposure. 3 pages later, they said, we are convinced of that. So they said, let's go ahead. One thing that you may hear from Cal OSHA or some other person is CDPH was worried there were some reporting of blood lead levels in construction in the 2014 to 2018 timeframe that seemed to be rising. And, you know, California and the Bay Area, we had a couple of very large bridge projects, which are going to affect some contractors and might have raised temporarily some blood lead levels of people. That's the only reason we can think those went up, but obviously that's a very confined group of, you know, craft workers and contractors who do operate on bridge projects. So if you hear that, oh my gosh, construction blood lead levels, you know, have been rising, understand it's a pretty isolated thing. And CDPH, when those things started happening, said, well, we don't have enough blood lead level samples of the working population. We need more data to be comfortable. And we talked with them about, you know, that's a real problem. If you and I were in charge of California Department of Public Health, we'd say, well, that's our responsibility to go out and find some volunteers and take blood level samples and sample them over time and see how things are going. Unfortunately, CDPH said, well, let's just make employers do it. Let's let them blood level test, you know, 100, 200,000 construction employees and general industry employees, and then we'll have enough. And then CDPH, all the people that have kind of worked themselves out of a job will have a job monitoring those blood lead levels of those people, you know, through those people's lifetime. And when we, again, continue to talk about the overreach of this, you know, they just came back and said there's no acceptable exposure to lead. And lead is a very, very serious thing. We understand that. Lead poisoning causes tremendous issues. So we're not debating whether lead can, at certain levels, harm employees. It's just they've reduced it to levels that nobody ever even thought about going to before. So this was the driver, and this is where we had to fight against almost an unstoppable force. Cal OSHA began this process in 2011, saying we need to rewrite these rules. We went to several input meetings, but there was no negotiating. Sorry for the misspelling there. Suddenly there was this guy from Cal OSHA named Peter Schultz, and he's leading these meetings, and nobody knew who he was. He was there for 2 years. He wrote their final proposal that was out, and then they announced his retirement, and he had worked for Cal OSHA for 2 years, the previous 20 years for California Department of Public Health in their lead unit. And in 2023, we had a really intense meeting as it was becoming closer to what would be finally presented on this regulation. And we show up to a meeting in Oakland and realize his name's on the phone list. He has been working since 2017 as a retired annuitant, which California allows retired people to collect their retirement, but go back to work for the agency they worked for, as long as they don't work more than 6 months in a year and they have no benefits, but they can continue working. And he's been there doing that. He's been the behind the scenes person that we thought from 2016 when they issued their final proposal, we thought they were kind of in dormancy and they were working behind the scenes, try and get this thing over the finish line. We fought. We got some concessions in our meeting from August 2023. The standards board finally approved it in February 2024, and they were promised by Cal OSHA that Cal OSHA would develop information to help employers implement this very draconian reg. And so they delayed the effective date to January 1, and Cal OSHA took 9.5 months to get that information to us. And actually, they've only given it to construction. There's no general industry guidance yet. And we have requested a delay of enforcement, hoping that, because they've given us hardly any time. I mean, think of this time frame. They took 13 years to pass a regulation. Cal OSHA staffers took 9.5 months to prepare guidance. And if you can't, we know not much happens in the last week and a half of the year. They gave us basically 15 working days to implement this regulation. It's sad. I requested that delay. The Deputy Chief of Research and Standards has confirmed by email that my request is being considered. Cal OSHA is dysfunctional enough. It'll be hard if that happens. Obviously, we will let you know if there's a delay of enforcement, because that would obviously help us push this off into next year and have a little more time to walk through this. But we need to be prepared that it may not work that way. So this is a problem because most of us would say we have very little lead exposure, and that would be accurate. Our fixtures are lead-free. Solder is called lead-free, even though it has, maybe 0.5% of lead in it. They can still call it lead-free. So most of us would say, I don't think I belong in this reg, but you'll see by the number changes how they've brought so many people in. And this is what Cal OSHA inspectors will be reading from their model compliance program. These are the activities where lead-containing materials could be altered or disturbed. Obviously, you see new construction, alteration, etc. And then the fact sheet for employees, lead can be present in a wide range of materials, including base metals. And some people have said even steel. If you're cutting, grinding, doing something on steel, there's enough trace lead in it that you could actually be at or above the action level, which requires us to do some things. And the problem with this reg is it's not Cal OSHA's burden of proof, it's ours. They have crafted it such that it's our burden of proof to say we're not in this thing. And that's why this thing is so over the top. They could have said, hey, these kinds of activities create a lead exposure, being done so many hours per day, and then, 130,000 contractors that have employees in California could say, okay, let me take that information. Instead, we're all supposed to individually deal with this. That's why it's a challenge. Okay. So who will be enforcing this? And this is kind of how urgent do we do this to be compliant by January 1, especially the depth of the regulation, if we have to go through some of that. Cal OSHA inspectors, as their enforcers are some industrial hygienists who will take lead far more seriously than the safety engineers just because they have more knowledge about it. Industrial hygienists are less than 20% of Cal OSHA's personnel. Um, so Cal OSHA has 266 enforcement personnel at this point. So there's probably 40 to 50 Cal OSHA inspectors who will likely be very interested in lead exposures and see this as an opportunity for them to educate and enforce and so forth. Safety engineers probably will not be so excited about it because, again, most of us have seen how less lead there is in the environment. And again, the problem is both IHs and safety engineers. Some of them are more almost armchair inspectors. They go to the job site, but then they say, send me your programs. And then they just compare our written programs to the regulation, and they issue us a lot of regulatory violations for not being in full compliance. They can do that with lead, and that's why we're going to talk about how to avoid easy citations that Cal OSHA inspectors could give us, and then what do we do about the deeper parts. I think they're not going to want to go very far on the deeper parts because they will, at least the industrial hygienists will understand our exposures to lead are not that great anymore. And then the burden of proof shifts to them to say, we believe your employees have been exposed to the level of harm, and therefore we have to do testing and prove that ourselves. Our hope is they're not willing to go that far because that's a lot of work and effort for them. Some of our counterparts in construction are concerned that plaintiff attorneys are going to use these regs and start making claims for employees, families, members who are exposed to lead, brought home on clothing, etc. And I don't want to discount that. I don't see it to the level other people are talking about it because plaintiff attorneys' business models are generally easy money. How can I make the most money with doing the least work? And they would have to go through a process of saying somebody actually has, medical symptoms directly connected to lead exposure from an employee taking it home. And, that's a big burden of proof for them to walk through. Will workers' compensation attorneys add this to their deal? Can they just say, well, every time we send an employee to the doctor, we're going to have blood lead level tested and see if there's an elevated blood lead level, and then make a claim in some way? They could, but again, they would have to go through the process of saying, this employee has suffered harm directly related to exposures from the job site. And then we get to talk about and investigate. What do they do on weekends? Do they weld on weekends as a side deal? Do they work at a gun range or load ammo or do those kind of things that would have also or mainly elevated their blood lead level? So the way CDPH ramrodded this thing and wrote it, they want us to panic and say, oh my gosh, we need to blood level test all of our employees and have them get medically tested, have an exam. And we want our members not to panic and say, okay, let's make an informed choice about each part of this and what we'll do or not do as we go through. Again, we're not saying lead is no big deal. It is. It's a terrible thing if it is at a level of harm to people. But we are so much less than that these days. So what are the regulatory changes? These are not actually new regulations. They've taken the current regulations and changed them. But the changes are dramatic. Huge is a fair description of them. And that's why we're very concerned. And that's why some Cal OSHA people will say, well, you're required to do air monitoring of your employees now. Well, most contractors would say not at the current permissible exposure levels. My employees would be nowhere near that or the action level. but now that they've dropped them effective January 1 so much, now we have to consider that. So the new regs apply to both construction and general industry. And some of you, depending on your situation, may have employees who technically will operate under both. Maybe a shop yard employee who does, welding fabrication, other cutting, grinding of, material, etc., might be more under general industry. Again, we don't have that guidance yet with, less than a month to go on this thing. But if you have covered an employee who might need to be covered by training and so forth in the construction regs, I think you're going to be pretty well off there. So the construction reg is 39 pages with 3 appendices of another 50, total 89 pages that in theory we need to be responsible for. General industry is a little less, 33 pages, same appendices, and there are the titles. In the link above that you see, the lead approved text, that is there because the Office of Administrative Law approved the text. It includes the strikeouts and deletions, so forth. On at 12:01 a.m. January 1, the regulation will shift over and replace the current 1532.1 in Title 8, and then all the deletions will be out of it. So it might reduce a page or two, but this is pretty much what we have. And we just want to note this in no way changes the CDPH governed lead-related construction program for those who do, renovation work, painting contractors who do painting on structures built while lead paint was still in use that have to go in and take off lead paint, that there's a whole set of requirements there. This doesn't change that at all. So what are these blood level numbers for lead? And we want to make sure, because some people get a little confused between the two. Blood lead levels are rated by micrograms per deciliter of blood. And the airborne is rated as micrograms per cubic meter of air. So we need to make sure if we're talking blood lead levels, numbers mean one thing. Airborne, they mean, there are different things that leads us to. But blood lead levels is, again, the thing CDPH is pushing for, grinding for, you might say. And they want to have more out there. So here are some numbers. 2011 was the year federally NIOSH, National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, decided, you know what, they used to say if you had a blood level 25 micrograms or higher, you were susceptible to having medical injury from that or illness. And they said, well, it could be lower, so let's just start recording and graphing those who have blood levels of 10 or greater. That's a big drop. And in 2011, the first year they rated that, there were 23 out of every 100,000 workers who had a blood level of 10 or greater. Again, this was their new belief that you could have problems if you at 10 or greater, you're called an elevated blood level. And you can see the numbers there. That's 0.02% of workers. So it's a pretty small category. You'd think they could target and focus on them, but even then, by 2022, that rate had almost dropped in half, down to 12. 0.01% of workers had that blood level. And again, that blood level can come from things outside of work. And that same year, 2022, California's rate was 4, believe it or not, or 780 out of 18 million workers. So less than 0.01% of California workers had an elevated blood lead level in 2022. But here you'll see in a minute how dramatically they have reduced the exposure level allowances. So, you know, yes, that does mean it's 780 out of 18 million workers have issues, but it seems like you could target and focus yourself on those people and try and make sure they're reduced. Um, it's it's amazing. And I put the web link here for this info because it may well be. We talked about Cal OSHA inspectors, some especially of the safety engineers, but even some of the industrial hygienists maybe have been told certain things. We may be able to educate some of them as they're out doing an inspection saying, what about lead? And we can say, well, here are the numbers. You can look them up as to why we have greatly reduced lead exposure, and trying to do such a massive regulation in California was quite an overreach. So these are the airborne exposure numbers. Action level, the action level, if air sampling shows employees are exposed at the action level or greater, the employer is supposed to review and say, are there things I could do to reduce the employee's exposure? The permissible exposure level, as you know, is the level we cannot allow employees to be exposed at or above. And this is where we then would have to definitely go through, in most circumstances, engineering controls, administrative controls, respiratory, to bring the employee exposure down below the 10. As you can see, these changes reduce the action level from 30 micrograms to 2, 93% reduction. When you see blood levels have reduced so greatly, the exposure level limit, just it's enormous. And for the PEL from 50 to 10, it's an 80% reduction. I mean, 2 micrograms, the action level, some people say if you cut steel, you are at 2 micrograms or greater. And any employee of ours could be on a site where someone is doing welding, 40 feet away, and maybe be exposed at that action level. And again, where this regulation doesn't just say you need to consider doing things, they actually tell you at an action level of 2 or greater, you have to do blood level testing of employees who are exposed to that and give them medical exams and ongoing evaluations at a level of 2. This is where it's really, really frustrating. If you and I were in charge, back in 2012, and we'd have said, hey, we are concerned about lead, we probably would have reduced the PEL from 50 to 30, reduced the action level from 30 to 15, and we wouldn't be having this conversation because we would say, none of you are going to be involved at those levels, so don't worry about it. But taking it down to 2, I mean, that's when they started this process in 2011, they didn't even think you could measure accurately down to 2. They say that now with technology improvements, but still, this is a huge problem. But CDPH didn't stop there. Because again, the burden of proof is on us to prove by air sampling that we are below 2. But they even pushed it beyond that to try and squeeze us by giving us these trigger tasks that if we have those, we can't just say, well, I don't think I was at 2 or greater. If we're doing these trigger tasks, we have to do air sampling. And until we do, we have to do, depending on the trigger task, all kinds of stuff. Again, they have an all other trigger tasks not listed that could be responsible for lead, and most Cal OSHA inspectors are going to say, hey, whatever you were doing, there could be some lead involved, or some other contractor on the site is going to create that for you. Level 1 and 2, you will see they talk about this is where lead containing coatings or paint are present. So unless you're, cutting, removing those kind of things, lead containing coatings or paint, level 1 and 2 wouldn't apply to you, but you can see level 3, the issue there. Oops. Um, you know, welding, torch cutting, um, regardless of whether you're cutting on anything that might contain lead. So this is where Cal OSHA inspectors who are excited about lead or excited about easy citations are going to say, wow, I believe you're at least at 2, 1 day a year, because that's what the regulation says. If any employee who's exposed at 2 or greater 1 day a year, you have to have gone through these things. So what many of us may do is wind up targeting which of our employees are, might do some part of this and try and, you know, um, segment them off so they're confined both where they work, how they work, and do whatever we need to do for them. So again, this is when you look at the blood level figures, both nationally and California, and compare it to this kind of reduction, it just makes no sense. And it's sad, but that's the reality. They got to push through and we have to deal with it. So what are those easy citations? Do we have a lead compliance program? Is it written? And this is where, again, you're kind of stuck. It's a catch-22. If I have a written program, I'm saying I must be thinking that employees are exposed at an action level of 2 or greater. If we don't have one, Cal OSHA is going to say you have to presume. Most of them will say, come on, your employees sometime during the year are exposed to 2 or greater. So what do we do? There's kind of a third option. I think some of us can do is not have a true full lead compliance program as per what we'll go over in a little bit, but something where we are monitoring, where we have prepared our employees by training. We'll talk about housekeeping and hygiene in a minute. We are prepared if we don't think we are at 2 or greater, but we have prepared our employees and we have prepared our supervision, and we strongly recommend safety director or somebody in HR in companies get pretty familiar with lead to be able to talk to Cal OSHA, and they can know we didn't just ignore this reg. We took it seriously. We did the things we think made sense. And yes, they may still give us a citation for not doing air sampling, but at least we can hopefully avoid these couple of basic ones. So that we have something in writing about lead would be a good idea. And again, that someone likely, looks at every new project and just confirms there's no new potential lead fixtures, products, anything that we would be doing on that site or around someone else. The industrial hygienists who are going to be, again, the Cal OSHA personnel, much more excited about this, are going to be wanting to deal with housekeeping and hygiene. Again, if we're at an action level of 2, we're supposed to segregate eating areas, provide changing areas for employees, disposal and cleaning. So if we've made, and again, in housekeeping, we want to have eating areas that are away from, potential silica dust and different things going on the job site. So if we've taken housekeeping into consideration and can demonstrate that, I think that can keep us out of that citation, because they can give us a separate citation for each one of these things, because they're separate subsections of the deal. Hygiene. Do we train employees on proper hygiene? And we can say, we don't think we're at the action level or greater, but hey, it never hurts to train employees. Maybe we do a tailgate once or twice a year about it. And again, we're kind of in a catch-22 because regular soap doesn't really take lead off of hands or skin. There is a soap you can buy from any of your suppliers. It's called D-lead. It's very effective. But again, are we saying if we provide it, are we saying we have an exposure to lead or not? The thought is having it readily available. Um, you know, I think the industrial hygienist Cal OSHA people would say, wow, that's great. You provided that. Employees know if they were ever, having lead that it's available, and they know that soap to use, that they're not kidding themselves if they use, other soaps trying to get lead off. Effective training, this is a big deal. And again, Cal OSHA has just gone, this is a real problem in all areas of Cal OSHA regs, because it used to be we were required to train employees. And therefore, if you provided a document with the employee's name and the training and who did it, you could say, we trained the employee, and Cal OSHA would accept it. But several years ago, they decided, let's change that and let's insert the phrase effective training, which means the Cal OSHA inspector can take an employee off to the side and say, tell me about your training on whatever it is, fall protection, lead, trenches, excavations, whatever. And if the employee can't articulate the basics of the hazard and what to do about it, the Cal OSHA inspector can say, I see you have a signed document, but it wasn't effective. The employee doesn't understand. And we know that training might have been a year before. And employees are very nervous and intimidated before Cal OSHA inspectors, and maybe do know the stuff but can't regurgitate it. So we need to do our best. The employee fact sheet is probably what you want to do as best you can. At least we can say we tried. Do most employees care about lead? No. So many of the, especially younger employees, grew up where lead has not been a big deal. And so there we go. And sadly, the regulation itself tells you have to train employees on the regulation and all the appendices, the 50 pages of appendices. How could that ever be done effectively? I don't know, but I would suggest at least giving that to the employer, giving them access to it so you can document they were given the information. But if we do a tailgate or something on the employee fact sheet for lead, I think that'll go a long ways. And the last part is signs. The regulation requires signs, and we'll see it a little bit later, but the sign says to put up is danger. Lead work area may damage fertility or the unborn child, causes damage to the central nervous system. Do not eat, drink, or smoke in this area. So this would be an easy citation. For Cal OSHA should say you don't have a sign up. But if we put the sign up, are we saying there's lead exposure here? Because in many cases, most cases, we want to say there isn't at the level of 2 micrograms or greater. Again, another catch-22. If we have the situation where some percent of our employees, are under the reg in that action level area, maybe, we give them signs they take with them to put up around where they're working if they are doing jobs that have that. Again, it's just a difficult situation. It'd be nice if they said just put up a potential warning like a Prop 65 that everybody ignores. But this is a challenge. And again, the other citation they will likely try to give is you didn't do air sampling or monitoring, but we have a potential difference of that. So now we're going to go to blood lead level and medical, what they call medical surveillance, having a medical exam and, follow up. Because that's the key to the next level is they believe if we are at an action level of 2 or greater, then all employees who are in that range need to have blood levels tested and have a medical exam. So, do employees have to submit to it? Cal OSHA has clearly said no. And this is where we want to be careful how we say it because we can't be made to look like we discouraged employees from having a blood level test. But I think it's fair to tell employees if they have one from their employer, yes, it's free for the employee, but their blood level and all of their identifying information will go to the California Department of Public Health and be in their registry for the rest of their lives. And some people who do ammo loading on the weekend and different side gigs may not want to do that. Some people may not want to do this at all. Some people may not want to do it knowing the government is going to have this information from them. It won't be random or anonymous. Their full information will be there. So I think it's fair to tell employees that and just make it clear we, offered it. They refused, and therefore, if we do not know what their blood level is, then we don't know if it's elevated or not, and we don't have to go through some of the other stuff, medical surveillance, etc. And again, we're not avoiding caring for our employees this way. You know, this action level is just borderline crazy. And employees shouldn't have to participate in it any more than we do. And then again, if we burdens on us, do we do air monitoring? Then the idea would be if we do air monitoring, that information comes back, who and what types of tasks are at the action level 2 or greater, are any at the permissible exposure level 10 or greater. Then we have to use, again, engineering, administrative, or respiratory controls. And we do need to understand, and this is where we do want to make it clear, if the employee is at a permissible exposure 10 or above micrograms per cubic meter, we can use engineering controls or maybe a respirator to bring their, breathing exposure below that level. And that's good or part of it. But if there really is lead in the air, is it getting on their clothes? And it's not good if they take it home and their, family member handles those clothes and tries to wash them and different stuff, because there's, again, a special detergent you want to use to get lead out of clothing, etc. So, again, what they're trying to do in this whole thing is say, until we perform the air monitoring and know we're under 2, we need to provide interim protections, which are blood levels and medical surveillance. So, this is where we want to be careful and make informed decisions. And we'll talk in a minute about the executive summary, because it has a good flow chart. If we actually, for those employees, we have to actually go through this for. So we're going to switch to that right now. Here we go. Oops. Peace. Go. Okay, so here is the Safety and Health Executive Summary that Cal OSHA just issued for construction. And this is, good information, and probably might be good to train some of your superintendents and so forth on, so we know we can be more aware of what's going on. Here's the danger sign that is required. And then here is their flow charts. And you can see they've underlined what's changing here, what they wanted to do. So, or occupational exposure to lead. we're required, it says, to do an initial determination, and that is by air sampling. And you can see this flow chart on the right in the orange says, until we do that, we're supposed to give interim protections for the trigger tasks we talked about, which include respiratory protection, blood level testing, medical surveillance. And we need to see this exception because this is where someone, safety director, somebody in operations can get in on this and say there are things we don't have to do if there is minimal exposure over the year. And for instance, here, medical surveillance, if an employee is less than 10 micrograms per cubic meter, um, or the employee only performs level 1 trigger tasks on 10 or less days every year. And some employees you might be able to say that's true. The level 3 trigger tasks we talked about, you can see shower facilities, except we're not feasible. And, when we were looking at shower facilities and when we had that meeting in August 2023, they were surprised that the 6 of us from construction had all done different parts of the homework. And we told them how shower facilities really aren't feasible because you need to have an area. And they just said, well, put up some curtains and, a hose. And we said, no. If the way this is structured, you're hosing off ostensibly lead. You can't put it in the ground. You can't let it go down a drain. And it has to be a secure area, and that's why it's not feasible in most cases. And again, you see monthly blood level testing, and this is until initial monitoring. That's why they're trying to push it, that they think, well, until we do that, we have to do all this stuff. So we go back to, we've done initial monitoring. If we are doing that, and this is where we can, the regulation, some people says it requires a certified industrial hygienist to do it. That's not true. And actually, you can do your air sampling your own self without an industrial hygienist actually doing it, because that's where it gets expensive, either with a CAI or regular. But you want to have a lab walk you through it. And again, you want to be careful about how you do it because you want to find out which of your processes, if lead is involved, actually do push you into the 2 or not, or into the permissible exposure level at 10 or greater or not, because you might be able to, again, reduce that exposure, which employees do it, how often in a day they do it. If an employee did something for 4 hours a day and it created a 3, can we do that for 2 hours one day and 2 hours the next, and it's now below 2 as an 8-hour time weighted average? These are things you'll want to, I think, talk with an industrial hygienist consulting type person to walk you through that. So if we've done the initial monitoring, if we are at an action level of 2 or greater, we're supposed to do monitoring from time to time, but here we go. Initial blood level testing or medical surveillance testing with medical exams. And just as an aside too, what we're hearing, because the regulation has a 26-page appendix for medical providers telling them how they are going to do medicine, basically. Many occupational medical providers are not going to do these exams. They are not going to be told by OSHA how to do their job. So it'll be interesting if we even try and do that. But this is where we can say, if you are not, okay, in this initial blood level testing exception for those not greater than or equal to the AL more than 30 days and 12 months, and not greater than 10, the permissible exposure level. This is where I think you'll want to do some, evaluation of workers and say, okay, when they are dealing with any potential lead containing materials, how can that be limited? You can see if you can even have somebody greater than 10 as long as they're not greater than 20 for 15 days in a year. So, and same for medical surveillance. So, this is where Cal OSHA can say, well, um, I think your employees were exposed at 2 or greater, and you haven't done air monitoring, and we can say we're still ostensibly supposed to have done the monitoring, but we can say these employees are not exposed. They do this minimally and they fit under the exceptions. That's a potential thing that we can do. And this is again where if the employee does submit to the blood lead level test, and it comes back the blood lead level per deciliter greater than 10, 10 or greater, then you have to do this in elevated blood level responses at 10, at 20, and if they wind up at 30, the physician is supposed to remove them at our cost until their blood lead level comes back down. So this is why CDPH driving for these blood lead levels is such a big deal, and we don't control what the employee does off hours and how that could raise their blood lead level. And then for those employees, if the testing shows off to the right here, 10 milligrams or greater cubic meter, we need to do, again, controls, including respirators, and walk through this. So this is a flow chart that I think is pretty helpful for us to walk through there. And we'll look at one last thing here. Go to, oops, not that. The model program. And this is if we actually do have to be walking through all these things. This is a fillable template. And again, it was part of the links we saw. Talks about what could happen. And this is where, and again, you might not want to say this is our lead compliance program. You might say lead prevention or something, so that your employees can, so that again, your safety director, your supervision has awareness and understanding and is, ready to deal with a new product or, type of project that might have a lead exposure. You've identified those people and that they are looking at things. And again, what you might, this might be a very short program because you will say, we believe we are not currently exposed at action level or greater. But then you can see it goes down and lists exposure controls, air monitoring information. And again, this would be all the different sources of lead, compliance program implementation schedule, work practice program. And again, we may just actually include this just to say as more a preventive measure, that we trained our employees on lead. We gave them the, employee fact sheet. We've done our housekeeping and hygiene facility issues, and we've minimized or eliminated it, and pretty much that's it. You can see this multi-contractor job sites. General contractors, builders, developers, they're going to deal with this at differing levels. Some are going to probably take this seriously depending on the project and want to have your full-blown lead program, and you're going to need to be careful bidding jobs that might have you required to, do the air monitoring based on the issues you're doing. And, if it's more your routine stuff, and the typical, single family, low rise, residential construction job site, you'll probably see less of that. But if you're on, the typical kind of podium, you've got retail, you've got different things going on, and or commercial institutional projects where lead is fabrication, different things, rebar, your employees might be exposed to those kind of things. You might want to do something about it. And other relevant information, inspections. This is again where you might say, our supervisors are trained and are watching out for if our employees are on site and somebody, some other contractor has a lead exposure operation near our employees, that we're prepared to deal with it. Again, where we're preventing and avoiding uh, those kinds of things, and then the attachments that would fill that out. So this is helpful if we have to go fully deep into this thing. It's where we are. So that's what we have for today. So sorry, Cal OSHA did this. We don't like it. It's done incorrectly, way too overdone, and all those kinds of things. But this is what we're up against. Cal OSHA inspector could be on site and say, "Let me see your lead issues documentation program January 1, or January 2." Because again, Cal OSHA inspectors, our employees are not going to complain that they're exposed to lead. More than likely, it'll be a Cal OSHA inspector brought out to a job site by a complaint, an accident investigation, and in plain sight sees our employees doing something, or another contractor. And again, it's very easy for a Cal OSHA inspector to just say, "Okay, I observed the site, but send me your lead program. I saw what I believe is an exposure to lead that would be at the action level or greater. So show me what you're doing about it." So hopefully this is some information to try and be prepared by January 1. And other than that, I don't see any final questions from anybody. So thanks for attending. And I know some of you will probably, or some others will be watching the recording, because like I said, Cal OSHA, it's ridiculously sad how little time they gave us to implement such a serious reg. As I told the Cal OSHA Standards Board and the Cal OSHA senior leadership in their last advisory committee meeting, you send a terrible message when you take 13 years to produce this and your staff has 9.5 months and your bureaucracy slows it down so that we basically get 15 days to put this thing together. So we hope they delay enforcement, but obviously we'll let you know. So thanks everybody. If we don't talk beforehand, have a great Christmas season, New Year's, and we'll look forward to 2025. There we go. Thanks, and talk to you all later.